Kyle, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
I am Kyle Sullivan. I am an amateur human. I goof off with cameras and YouTube.
Cool. I'm TJump. I sell bathtubs. Occasionally do a debate now and again. So you are moderately interested in Star Trek, I imagine. Is that a thing?
Moderately, yeah.
And I'm moderately interested in religion, so decided to have a conversation to bridge the two because I think they talk about that every once in a while in Star Trek. It's an interesting topic.
Oh, yeah.
So, what are the various religions? Like Gene Roddenberry, he was a skeptic, right? He wasn't very religious.
I think he brands himself late in life as a skeptic, or I don't know if he's full-on atheist or something like that, but something like that.
So he had an interesting approach to religions in his sci-fi world. What is your take on that? What do you think his portrayal of religions was, and the various kinds of religions in Star Trek?
I think on the whole that we ought to consider Star Trek to be a kind of secular Aesop's fables. And the secularism is so baked in that it is almost not worth mentioning sometimes. And I think that's where Roddenberry started. That's what he peppered in, and other writers, like half a century worth of writers have all contradicted, amended, added to, taken away, that sort of thing. Apart from that, he in the original series didn't really talk about it too strongly. One or two alien characters episode wise would bring it up, but it wasn't overtly a religion versus science in the Western sense kind of a story. It was always like, I don't know, an evil or an excess of a particular kind of religious situation, like a cult, for example.
Do you think that has to do with the fact that it was very controversial back then when the original Star Trek came out? Being an atheist was not seen in a positive light. And later on in his life, I think it was much more acceptable. And so we saw a lot more expressions of religion in the more later versions. Do you think he was for that? Do you think he wanted to advocate for more secular values?
I think he would have. Definitely. Because later in life, he definitely talked about it to crowds and stuff like that. You know, he famously was a guy who preached like, you know, one day we'll figure ourselves out. And like all of these previous chapters will be just that, a previous chapter. And I think, the assumptions they always sort of lumped what the West feels a religion is into those previous chapters for himself. And he got the chance to do that when he got to do the Star Trek: The Next Generation. Like he basically got a second crack at his vision, and he hit it a little more strongly. It wasn't like overt still, but like he hit that secularism a little more strongly in The Next Generation. And because it was established so well like that, it's a theme that runs through the rest of the franchise.
Yeah, for sure. And how do you think, where was the first portrayal of that was really a strong representation of his secularism? What do you think his representation of religion in general was at that point?
An episode called Justice for the Next Generation comes to mind, where some super advanced interdimensional being was sort of play acting as a god for a much smaller culture, and Captain Picard and crew kind of saw through that, and they couldn't compete on the level of technology with these guys, but they definitely threw shade on the fact that, hey, they're not gods, y'all. Chill, you guys are stuck in a particular mode when really the universe looks like this. And I think that particular theme is the one most hammered on, if anything, throughout the original series, throughout the Next Generation. It isn't until you get to DS9 when you start dealing with religion in a more specific way, when you get to the Bajorans.
And what is that more specific way?
The Bajorans are So like they're a long-term recurring species on Deep Space Nine. You see them every episode. You have major characters that are Bajorans, and they have the worship of the prophets, which is ironically the same thing as justice, where these aliens that live in an artificial wormhole are portrayed as gods in the Bajoran culture, and so they openly worship them. And the Federation people are like, these guys are just like wormhole aliens, right? And it didn't matter because their faith is pretty strong. But all of the trappings of religious life and uh, the view of Western religion from a secular standpoint are all sort of slowly examined across DS9. There's one episode in particular that I like where the Pope of the Bajorans, Kai Wen, shows up to the school on the space station and is suddenly mad that they're teaching a secular version of reality instead of their faith-based one. And like there's a whole episode about the evils and whatever of that. And in DS9 they get time to sort of stop and think about that and talk about some of those more specific things. The rest of the franchise handles it in different ways. The suicide bombers and 9/11 terrorists sort of, add on to whatever we think religion is. It gets talked about in Enterprise in an episode or two. And, apart from that, it doesn't get too strong. It does show up in specific storylines, but I'd say like if you're going to have a conversation about religion in Star Trek, I think Bajorans kind of come up as the poster child because they're there on screen the longest and their religion the most. And I'd argue that the Ferengi are one of Trek's great religious cultures, but that can be a whole other thing if you want.
The Ferengi being religious as opposed to like straight up capitalism.
Yeah.
How does that work? What is your take on the Ferengi being religious?
Well, so in the 24th century, you have a replicator-based economy. Peter Diamandis and Rick Webb, Earth-based real-life capitalists, have talked about this, especially Rick Webb. He wrote a whole book about it, about the economics of Star Trek. They use Star Trek as like a way to describe post-scarcity economics. And, if you're a Federation citizen, you're born on Earth or whatever, like, you don't really need to get a job. You go to the replicator, you get all your meals taken care of, all of your basic necessities, housing, clothing. You can choose to do something if you want. It's like way more free than our society. That safety net's really nice. But for them, it's like it would be anachronistic to go back and manufacture things the way we do it because the technology's just advanced to a point where things are essentially cheap. There's a limit on that. No one's handing out starships or planets or anything like that. But if you need a shirt or breakfast, they got you, right? The Ferengi dwell on this exact same system. They have replicators and starships and matter energy conversion, but they're running around the galaxy like charging people for stuff that you can go get replicated. They're paying for things that like it's out of the way anachronistic to have to deal with. And so my perspective on that for an upcoming essay we're doing is that maybe the Ferengi choose to stay in a kind of capitalist mode or mercantilist mode in order to placate a religious sense instead of like an economic sense, because Quark doesn't need to run a bar to live in the universe. He wants to run a bar. Religion is often a choice. People don't see it that way, but you don't have to live that way if you can see other options. And if you're on a Federation space station filled with replicators and people who don't use money, what are you doing, Quark?
So do you think those 100 and something principles are the religious principles?
A moral code. Yeah. This is a list of rules that you need to follow to be a better person. It's like the 10 Commandments.
It's an interesting view of a better person. Those laws are.
Well, the Ferengi exist as like a commentary on ourselves, like how we are, like we are, very greedy, very capitalist. There are a few people in the world that if you read them the rules of acquisition without telling where it comes from, they'll be like, yeah, I just need to think more like that and I can get what I want,
Yeah, the self-help gurus, that's all they do pretty much.
Yeah.
So, but why, where's the religious connotation between that? Because I always interpreted them just to be straight up money mongers. Why read a religious view into that?
Well, mostly because A, they don't need to do the behavior. B, it satisfies them in a particular way. And C, it's very like a, if it is the circumstance and they don't need to do it and choosing to do it, it's a very conservative thing to do. Like in Christianity, we describe Jesus as a sheep herder, a shepherd. We all kind of know that symbology. I almost guarantee that almost none of us know the actual shepherds, or you can see the sheep.
Oh, I think your mic just broke up a little bit.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can. I think it was just like the way you were holding it or something. Like,
oh, sorry.
That's good.
Yeah, so shepherds are a symbol that are conserved into a society that no longer, I mean, we have people who keep sheep, but like nobody knows an actual shepherd. Yet we all know that symbol. It's conserved in the religious thought. And I think that religions kind of do that. Like they evolve and change with society the same as any institution, but like religions in particular have to brand themselves in the symbology in which they're created to maintain, you know, to sort of maintain their, not prestige, but like that's how you know they're legit. Yeah, you know. And so like maybe the Ferengi are doing the same thing. Like I talk about money and capitalism as a Ferengi citizen, even though I don't need to, but because that is how I profess my faith. And you know, they have a divine treasury, and you can bribe your way in, and how much debt you die with factors in how you spend your afterlife. And when a Ferengi dies, their body is liquidated and auctioned off, and all their material possessions are auctioned off in order to give the Ferengi who died a little bit of ammunition as they head to the blessed exchequer. So like there's a whole mythology that's built up around it, and it just lends itself so well to a religious worldview. And like I said, when you add in the replicator thing, you're just like, what, Cork, you don't need this bar, man. Why are you stressing yourself out? Chill, go to Ryza.
Can you replicate Latinum?
Why can't you? Why don't they?
Yeah, I'd assume they just would if they could just replicate it. There'd be like a Ferengi in the corner, just replicate. I am the richest Ferengi.
I know, right? But they have, so I know they have laws against unions. They have like breaking a contract is the most heinous crime in Ferengi society. Makes sense. Maybe they have a law against that. You know, I mean, holy water in a Catholic church has gone through a particular ceremony. You can't just pour water in from a sink, right? It has to go through a process. There are rules. There's a ritual.
Yeah, that seems really interesting. Like, it's hard to imagine how that works. How do they explain that in the Star Trek series? Like, if they could replicate Latinum, why don't they?
I don't think they've ever explained it, and I'm charging writers now with figuring this out, because there's got to be a Ferengi's like who's thought very sacrilegiously, like, I'm just going to fix this right now so I can buy my own moon.
Yeah.
You know?
You just like one who's in debt and about to die. Like, all right, just print me some off and we're good. Settle all the debts. We're fine now. Heaven is good.
Yeah, it might be like, maybe it's so sacrilegious that you can't talk about it, you know, like how pedophilia is like the last great sin of the West. And like, even if you bring it up accidentally, like people will start looking at you out of the side of their eye, you know, like maybe replicating money is like, oh my God, he's about to be ostracized. I don't know. They need to explain it, but Trek has a lot of sins to answer for in their consistency. So they need a lot of explaining to do, I think.
What are some of their other inconsistencies that bother you a lot?
Oh my God. There's how many days left in the week? Are you kidding me? 50 years and 1,000 different writers, and they've contradicted themselves in 100 different ways. In the final episode of the original series, for example, Captain Kirk mentions that women are not allowed to be starship captains. Yeah. Nobody talks about it. They never corrected it in canon. What do you do with that? It's just sitting there like a giant middle finger from the 60s to the future. And you're just like, well, hell, Star Trek is littered with all this stuff. And it's because it's so old, and it's like a time capsule of various progressive societies, you know, and the further back you look, the more cringeworthy it gets, you know.
For sure. Another viewer says Latinum or properly Latinum detencionide, cannot be replicated accurately by any replicator known or predicted. TNG novel Balance of Power.
Oh, it comes from a novel. See, some writer was thinking about it. Smart. And that's all you need is a little bit of exposition to be like, oh, well, of course. We'll just assume that's true and move along.
Seems weird. Why couldn't it be replicated? Replicators can do anything atomically, right? Why couldn't they replicate Latinum? Doesn't make sense.
Exactly. I think for Ferengis building replicators, they'd have to have like a chip in there, like a governor chip on a car that prevents excessive speed. Like, these are the list of things you can't replicate: banana peels, gold, and underwear.
Then you get the Ferengi who are like, I'm going to go steal a replicator from a different country, a different planet. Like, ha! Victory is mine.
Yes. Yeah.
So, what do you think is the worst portrayal of religion in the series?
That's a good question. Because I think in a lot of ways, when religion comes up as a topic, it's very superficial for Star Trek, as a lot of topics are. You know, like Aesop's fables, secular Aesop's fables. You don't have time to really visit certain things. There's a portrayal in Enterprise of these religious fanatics that take over the Captain Archer's Enterprise to see some kind of like celestial event that they view as part of their religious worldview. I think it typifies how religious characters are treated. Not a lot of depth. You only see the sin of their problem or whatever. And on the other hand, you get what they did with Native America, with Chakotay in particular, which was a whole mess, and with a couple of Next Generation episodes that deal with Native Americans. You get this kind of like free pass on Native, what the West thinks of as Native spiritualism, which is mostly bogus. And they're both correct and can do whatever they want, and it's unquestioned, and there's no like sins accumulating in that. I think those are probably the two poles, but on the whole, very shallow. It's extremely shallow, and any example you pull up will suffer from the same problem. I actually don't think, unless you talk about the Ferengi as a religious culture, even with the Bajorans involved, I don't think Star Trek talks about it with any real depth that is significant for a sustained conversation. I think anyone who wants to think about Star Trek and religion is going to get hung up on all the ways they screwed it up more than the actual substance of what they're trying to say, because there's much more that they screwed up.
What do you think about Q as like a representation of the Abrahamic God in a sense? It seems like there's this being who's super powerful, likes to toy with his little prodigy and do whatever he wants with them, and they have to obey him. And he plays games, and sometimes he rewards them. It seems like a great analogy for the Christian God.
I'd actually liken him more to like a Greek god, you know, like he's like a trickster god, like the trickster god of the Lakota, or the way the Greek gods meddle in mortal affairs for the fun of it. But yeah, he is. I guess he's probably like the prophets of the wormhole and Q are probably the most godlike creatures in the universe, and like Q is omnipotent and like all powerful or whatever, and like he basically is a god. He probably presents as a god to people. Why isn't he a god? He just is a god according to our definition. So why not? Why not operate from that principle? Because he could do all the things to you that God can, and he shows up.
Sort of slight improvement over the typical God.
Yeah, and he has a sense of humor. So maybe that's an improvement.
What did you think of the Picard series with Q?
I didn't like it. Wasn't my cup of Earl Grey. How about yourself?
I liked the first season, not as much the second season. The first season was pretty fun.
Yeah, first season started off really strong, and I was into it, but the second season was, I don't know what that was. Yeah. But I'm going to watch the third one, you know, because I'm contractually obligated at this point. They've already got their hook in me.
Yeah. Strange New Worlds, though, was a huge fan of that one. That one was great.
That was great. I think Star Trek Prodigy, or especially Strange New Worlds, is probably the best Trek of the new era.
For sure. I think it was an homage to the original. It had enough nostalgia effect and intellectual acuity. It wasn't like fake and cartoonish. It was really realistic in the way they portrayed it, and I thought that was great. I like
Yeah.
the characters, and the acting was really good. The storyline was really good. I like that one a lot. And
Yeah.
Prodigy, what one is Prodigy? Is that the cartoon one? No, that's Lower
Yeah.
Decks. Lower Decks is the one I'm thinking of.
Lower Decks is animated, and I have my own problems with that. But Prodigy is also animated, but it's like a more of a CGI kind of animation. Prodigy is really good, and it's sort of like a sideways sequel to Voyager in a sense. Janeway's a character there, but it's surprisingly good. It has all the ethos of Star Trek built in, and none of the blockbusterism of Discovery or Picard.
Yeah, that's interesting. Oh, is that the one with the kids?
Yeah.
I think I saw the first few episodes a while ago. Yeah, that one was interesting. What do you think is the worst portrayal of Star Trek?
Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. Hey, look, there's a god in that one. A reoccurring theme is that people are pretending to be gods in Star Trek. Devil in the Dark for the Next Generation, Star Trek V. What does God need with a starship? Yeah, maybe Star Trek V. Me and Discovery aren't getting along very well. But there's stuff to like about Discovery.
It's got great graphics, phenomenal graphics.
Yeah. It looks great. The sets are amazing. Actors are doing a good job. Me and Lower Decks aren't getting along, but I know everyone else loves it. But there's no question that people making it are competent and that they love Star Trek. You can tell. I don't know, man. I think Star Trek V gets the bottom slot.
All right. So why do you hate Lower Decks?
For me, Star Trek is about science fiction. And like my favorite Trek is the spaces where they bump right into the unknown and you get to play with those questions. And I like the societal commentary generally, but like I really like science fiction particularly. Star Trek the motion picture is my favorite of the films, and the whole V'ger situation is such an alien thing. Like I really love it when Trek gets into those spaces. Lower Decks doesn't touch any of that. It's just like a giant in joke, and I recognize that is fun and that people like that kind of stuff. But like right now, what I want from Trek is I want to rethink how I see my reality, and I'm just not getting any of that from modern Trek. Not that much, especially from Lower Decks, And I don't know how I feel about it existing. Like I know it's canon, and I know that, I just don't know how to rectify it because like it doesn't really talk about any of those sort of themes that I'm most gravitated to Star Trek about. So I'm really mixed about it. Great characters though, like the characters are fun and the jokes are funny. You have to be a Star Trek fan to get them, and I am, but I want more episodes like Where No One Has Gone Before, The Next Generation, or the fourth season of Discovery with Species 10C, that whole first contact situation. That was actually delicious. Like that was some science fiction where you start out in a place and by the time you get to the end of that place, like you're in a completely different mindset of what you're seeing. That was the way V'ger was in the motion picture. The whale probe of Star Trek 4, like that's what I want to see. I want to explore some stuff. I don't see Lower Decks doing that.
Well, I feel that's understandable because they did say we're going to do like a lower class ship, and the unimportant people on a lower class ship, we're really not even going to do first contacts, do like second contacts. And so they don't really have much left to explore at this point. Like it's already been explored. We're just here with the backup crew. So I can kind of understand why they wouldn't like try to force that in since they're trying to be like less important people in general.
Yeah. I mean, as a joke, it totally works. I'm just not in the mood for the joke, I guess.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So what do you think? You mentioned the one episode where you thought you had a completely different mindset. What was that and how did it affect you?
Remind me again of the context of that section.
You were talking about why you didn't like Lower Decks, and you said it's not like this one episode that really you go into it and it changes your mindset after the end.
Oh, just something like V'ger, just something like that, like the whale probe, or there's an episode of Voyager where the ship arrives at a planet that's spinning really, really, really fast, and like as they observe the planet, the civilization's transpiring very quickly, and they're in orbit for long enough according to the timeline of the planet that they kind of become like a permanent fixture in the cultures of the planet, and like it just brings home that not everyone's operating at the same temporal speed, and that time is relative, and like, stuff like that. That's why I like science fiction. It's about viewing ourselves in different lights, and I think Star Trek's kind of gotten away from that in a very real way the last decade or so. It's leaning into blockbuster tropes. They don't do a lot of science fiction, but they do love the action adventure stuff. Lower Decks is a completely different flavor. It's more of like a Family Guy in space kind of a thing, and I'm not getting to touch any of that, that recontextualizing my own reality kind of stuff, and I adore that. That's why I like science fiction.
For sure. That's why I was a big Stargate fan. Did that a lot.
Yeah, Stargate was cool. Yeah.
So, what do you think is the most challenging thing about what Star Trek was trying to be? Like, what do you think was the parts that they did that made you question, but not in a good way?
Not in a good way. Like,
well, like for some of the things when I was watching, were a lot of the political context. Like you mentioned that they couldn't have women captains. That was a good example. Where there's certain political tropes that are ingrained from the author's perspective that don't seem like they fit in the world.
There's very few of those that are like overt. Like the whole women can't captain starship things. That's freaking overt, and you can see it a mile away. In fact, when you're watching it as a modern person and they say it out loud, you will physically cringe. There are a few moments like that. But I think the unintentional stuff is what's more interesting, right? The Next Generation in particular came to the United States at a time when liberalism in this culture was having like a kind of self-reflective moment where we were wary of both interference in other nations and other cultures, but also wanted to be progressive and teach people progressive things. And so like this whole Prime Directive song and dance is really intensified with Captain Picard, and they preach about letting cultures die off, and trying to stand up for principles over practicalities. And I think that as the years fly by, more and more you can look at the Next Generation as a kind of encapsulation of how America felt about itself in the 90s. And it's clearing up now, like I can see it, but I think more and more people are going to say that's weird. It is an artifact of its time politically. Those kinds of things are built in unintentionally. Like it's all a giant time capsule, and like it takes a little bit of work, but you can pull that stuff out and be like, what do they mean? And it's all unintentional, and I love that. Tickles my anthropology bone.
One thing that I always found strange was that there was no dedicated military. Like even at that stage, especially since you have like a whole bunch of different warring factions, you would expect there to be a dedicated military faction, because like, you'd expect to need one. Just sending explorers to do everything seems like that would be a giant missed necessity in the world. It seems like it's completely just thrown in there just for the sake of it, for the principle of it. But pragmatically, I think they would probably have a military. That's like something I don't think they would get rid of that for any reason.
Yeah, especially when the Dominion or the Borg come calling you. Like, we're going to get Hernando de Soto to figure out our stuff for us, or we're going to have like, a standing army. It is kind of strange how they never explain that.
Yep. And there was the new ones with what's his name? Something Pine, Chris Pine. And they had that big black ship that just had all this like super technology power. Like, why isn't that just standard? That should just be everywhere. Just be like an entire section of just that.
Yeah, section 31 secret military ship, and they made a big deal about it. Like that was somehow like crossed a line. And I like we have the most powerful standing army in the history of our species. Like we don't think like that. So why is Star Trek thinking like that? That is something that's never really been answered.
Yeah, it just seems like illogical, like logically, like Spock, like come on, Spock, you guys would have a military. Like it seems like a good idea to have a concentrated technological powerhouse that is meant to battle other technological powerhouses, not just send your explorer ships to do it.
Yeah, exactly. The Federation's like the world's most well-funded Salvation Army, I guess. And so like I'm not gonna send those guys out into the field of battle.
Exactly.
Although on Enterprise, they did have Makos during the third season, when they went to war with the sphere builders or whatever for that whole season. They made a big deal about putting Marines on the ship, Makos, and the contrast between that and the exploration and whatnot. But I don't think we've ever seen that come back around.
For sure. We do have a few questions from the audience. Mr. Universe asks, can you ask him if he would like Star Trek to be as popular as Star Wars, or is it better the way it is?
I think it's better the way it is. I think if it's left to its own devices, it'll get to be the thing it's supposed to be. And if you're as popular as Star Wars, you end up worried about pleasing a general crowd, and that detracts. I think it detracts from Star Wars too. You know, Star Wars was its own thing, and it was cool. And now it's all about chasing money, so they're trying to appeal to as many people as possible. And I think when you do that, you kind of have to dumb down your storylines a bit. I think everything suffers when it's generalist. Be specific. Be weird.
I agree. That makes a lot of sense. He also asks, have the DMV wait times improved? What does that mean?
In the 24th century, maybe?
I think so, probably.
I don't know. Probably not. What did Leonard McCoy say at the end of Star Trek 4? The bureaucratic mentality is the only constant in the universe. Expect those lines to continue.
For sure. So do you have any questions you want to talk about? I do have I didn't get the pro version of Zoom, so we got like 5 minutes left before this one.
Oh, no worries. What do you think that Star Trek's talking about in terms of religious or spiritualism? What do you see? What stands out?
Well, to me, it seems like they pretty consistently portray religion as a rather primitive need for societies. And I don't think that they address the social benefits of religion enough, because I think religion does have a lot of positive aspects in the way it brings communities together and gets people to unite behind a cause and gives people comfort and purpose and those kinds of things. And so I think that religion, in the similar way as like a culture of football fans or whatever, can be a really strong binding force to bring people together and build communities, and can be used as a tool to help people to grow, and especially like introverts like myself, to have people or have groups you can go to spend time with and have something to talk about. So I think there's a lot of benefits to religion that aren't really addressed, where it can be used for good in certain contexts. Like one of the things here locally, there's a religious organization that offers like affordable housing for different groups, and we see a lot of religions going out and doing missionary work, which the conversion part is bad, but the helping part is good. And so I would like to see more episodes like that, where they have religious groups going out and trying to help and violating the Prime Directive by helping the poor people to like actually improve their lives and give them technology. And then Star Trek Enterprise like, no, you can't do that. We have to stop the churches from helping people.
Now that would be a good conundrum. I like the sound of that.
Well, we got like 3 minutes left. Do you want to give any links or references where people can find out more about your work?
I'm a director, a filmmaker. I am one half of TrekSpertise.com. If you like video essays about science fiction, we've got a new one cooking up about the Prime Directive right now that'll be out in December, and it promises to make everybody mad, which is a good sign. But apart from that, I work on films, and I just got off a film shoot, and I'm going back into another film shoot, and I'm shooting a romantic comedy next year. And I don't know, screendoorpictures.com is where you could find that stuff at. But if you're here, you're probably here for the Star Trek. So TrekSpertise is the way to go.
Nice. Thanks again for coming on. Really appreciate it. It was a great conversation, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Likewise, man. Thank you.
Talk to you later.